On January 10th, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Protect Illinois Communities Act. It's the ban on more than 170 different semi-automatic weapons and magazines over certain capacities, and creates a gun registry for those who had firearms before they were being banned. They have to register those with state police. Well, that was more than 90 days ago, and today it's got its day in federal court in the Southern District of Illinois, where you have 4 cases consolidated into one, and arguments are going to be happening in East St. Louis Federal Court this afternoon. Good morning. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. We've been covering this since even before it passed. Looking at all the committee hearings, hearing the testimony that was provided. If you recall, there were several committee hearings that were laid out, about 4 or 5 of them. The first 2 had primarily those who wanted more gun control, and they listened to victims from the Highland Park July 4th mass shooting. They heard victims from other mass shootings throughout the city of Chicago. But then they did open it up to some opponents, and we reviewed a lot of those various talking points from all those different sides. But ultimately, they did craft a law through the House. That got changed by the Senate, and the Senate passed their own. And if you recall, we're going to do a little bit of a retrospective here. And I do want to hear from you at some point at 217-629-7970. That's the phone number, live and local on WMAY, where you can call in. And I want to hear your predictions as to what you think is going to happen today. Not just, are they going to rule from the bench, or what you think ultimately the outcome is going to be. But let's go ahead and rewind all the way back to when this thing passed the Senate. Here is a bit of that debate on the Senate floor between several senators, and it starts with former state senator Darren Bailey sounding off on his concerns about this legislation passing.
Just as the First Amendment protects modern forms of communications and the Fourth Amendment applies to modern forms of speech, the Second Amendment extends prima facie to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, even those that were not in existence in the time of our founding. Friends, you've got to know that the actions that you're taking right now are tyrannous, as my colleague Senator Bryant suggested. You also must know that I and millions of other gun owners in this state will not comply.
We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we sit here today and look down on them and say, you were wrong. I'm telling you right now, it's fitting, because in less than 48 hours from now, all of us are going to raise our right hand and pledge an oath to uphold the Constitution of Illinois and the Constitution of the United States.
And remember, this was on Lame Duck Day, essentially the final days of the previous General Assembly before a new General Assembly was to be seated. Let's hear more now from State Senator Neil Anderson during debate on the Senate floor just before they passed their version.
All of you that are thinking about voting for this today, you should resign.
And we have the power, and I would say the responsibility, to put our constituents ahead of the gun lobby, politics, and profit. The callous murder of our children and our teachers in schools, our neighbors at a grocery store, or friends and family celebrating our nation's birthday at a parade must end. I ask each of you to picture your child, your partner, your parents, and then vote like their lives depend on it. They do.
The weapons on this list are designed to do one thing and one thing only: kill people in a horribly brutal and vicious way. This will not solve the problem, but this is absolutely a step in the right direction. I appreciate all of your support as we have negotiated what I believe is a much better bill than it started. I look forward to working with our partners in the House to pass this tomorrow and to put it on the governor's desk. We'll see you in court.
And court it is. Today in federal court, Southern District of Illinois, 4 lawsuits combined into one challenging the state's ban on certain types of semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities and that gun registry. So the Senate president there saying we'll see you in court, but it still had to make it past the House. And on the final day of the House session, you had debate and ultimate passage of this ban. Here's starting with State Representative Bob Morgan.
Ladies and gentlemen, the people of the great state of Illinois have been waiting decades for legislation just like this. Let them wait no longer. I urge and I vote.
Never again will we allow our Constitution and our freedoms to be shredded by your political agenda. We don't trust you. Too many citizens in this state don't trust you. A government unchecked, a government willing to defy our Constitution is a government that is completely out of control. So you can sit here and dictate whatever you want today. Maybe the political winds are in your favor here today, but I can tell you that we will not comply. And you're not going to do a darn thing about it because the law, the Constitution, and the founding principles are on our side.
State Representative Blaine
Mr.
Wilhauer.
Clerk, take the record with 68 voting yes, 41 voting no, 0 voting present. The House does concur in Senate Amendments 3, 4, and 5 to House Bill 5471, and this bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.
So that, again, is the House passing that, and we move on now next to the signing of the measure that happened just within hours of it passing the House on January 10th. And Governor J.B. Pritzker having that signing ceremony surrounded by various activists that he says were instrumental in getting this across the finish line. And those activists working their channels to bring about the ban on certain types of weapons. So that's how it played out in the Senate, then the House. Again, Senate President Don Harmon says we'll see you in courts. That day is today down in East St. Louis Federal Court with 4 cases being consolidated. I'm all dressed up, ready to go. Got my press credentials for federal court. I'll be inside the chamber. And if you want to follow along with the latest details, I suggest that you follow me on Twitter. Just search Bishop on Air, all one word, Bishop on Air. And throughout the afternoon, hearing starts at 1:30. I'm going to do what I can to put out the most fresh updates possible as to what's being debated and what the trajectory is of this case. Coming back, we will continue our review of how we got to this point from then to now. We heard the Senate and the House pass it. What about that signing ceremony and some of the actual questions? And then what about enforcement? So we'll get to all of that coming up next here on WMA. Reviewing some of the then to now of Illinois' gun ban and the litigation against it today in federal court, 130 East St. Louis Federal Court. You've got 4 plaintiffs groups. The first from Thomas Mag out of Crawford County, state case that was transferred to federal court. Then you had the Illinois State Rifle Association file a suit, the National Shooting Sports Foundation filing a suit, and Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois filing a suit. So 4 altogether that have been consolidated into one. All the briefings have gone back and forth. Today's the day that they'll hear oral arguments. Now, what could happen after today is the judge in this, Judge Stephen McGlynn, he could take it under advisement, meaning he's not going to rule from the bench. If that happens, it could be a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month before he actually issues a ruling on what the plaintiffs are seeking, a preliminary injunction. All right, so an initial halt to the law statewide. This would be different from what we've seen in state-level cases where only named plaintiffs are kept safe from the state enforcing against them because they got temporary restraining orders. The state cases really focus on the issue of equal protections, where they say because the law does not apply to those who are in law enforcement or security sectors. They say that you can't carve out constitutional rights for some and not for others. That's the argument in the state level cases. You've got one in front of the Illinois Supreme Court, a lot of drama around that issue, and we've talked about that a bunch as well. But the federal cases is what we're focusing on today, because in federal court, you've got those 4 cases that are challenging the law on Second Amendment grounds. Now, let's get to more of kind of the signing ceremony the governor held and some of the questions about enforcement. How is he going to enforce this? Because even before the measure was passed, ultimately, you had sheriffs across the state. And it turned out it was a couple at first, and then it was a dozen, and then it turned out to be the vast majority of sheriffs across the state saying that they're just not going to enforce this because they don't see, number one, how it's enforceable, or it's unconstitutional. Here's Governor J.B. Pritzker responding to those questions.
Well, you don't get to choose which laws you comply with in the state of Illinois. Let's be clear. The fact is that, yes, there are, of course, people who are trying to politically grandstand, who want to make a name for themselves by claiming that they will not comply. But the reality is that the state police is responsible for enforcement, as are all law enforcement all across this state. And they will, in fact, do their job, or they won't be in their job. Well, remember that anybody who doesn't comply, there are consequences for that. So, we've given people, I think, a year. We're at about a year, right, for people to comply, to fill out the paperwork and so on, and we expect them to do that.
We were going to block it as soon as possible. I think it's worth noting that the law was passed behind the walls, guarded by people, good guys with guns. The governor signed it behind good guys with guns.
And this is John Bach from Guns Save Life.
And he's effectively taking the guns away from the little people here in Illinois, the most effective guns for self-defense, the most popular selling guns for self-defense. He's looking at banning them or limiting their possession to the private property of the individual who is registered with them with the state of Illinois. But the bottom line is, though, this thing's going to be blocked by sometime early February at the latest, and it's going to be done at that point. I mean, there's already Supreme Court precedent on this. There's already other states that have tried to do the same thing that have been shut down.
And that was back in January. We have not had the law completely blocked. Again, temporary restraining orders keeping certain individuals safe that signed on to lawsuits, but the law is, from what the state's attorney, the U.S. attorney, what the Attorney General says and what Illinois State Police say is still in effect, despite a Macon County judge saying it's unconstitutional. Regardless, it's in court today in front of the federal courts in East St. Louis. And more on the issue of enforcement. We talked a while back with Sangamon County Sheriff Jack Campbell, but the question of how exactly this is going to be enforced, who's going to enforce this? Even Attorney General Kwame Raoul, who's defending the governor in federal court today, he talked about that enforcement question.
Once the legislature passes a legislation and the governor attaches his signature to it, it's the law of the land that they have the duty that they've sworn an oath to enforce. I will say also that as law enforcement agencies, there's overlap in jurisdiction as well. So if they don't do their jobs, there are other people available to do the job.
Where we are is tyranny, pure tyranny, disrespect. This is against all gun owners. They don't care what color you are, where you reside, where you live, where you work. Their goal is to disarm America. And they made that very clear. They need to get involved. What they need to do is step up to the plate and start to become plaintiffs. Reach out to some of these organizations to see if they could get involved with fighting on the forefront.
Well, right now we're gathering plaintiffs. We sent out an email, and plaintiffs are coming in from all over the state. And so we will vet those plaintiffs, and we may file one suit. We may file two suits on different basis. We'll find out. We'll see what the attorneys say. But right now we're gathering all the plaintiffs.
Well, of course, we are concerned about the rightward turn, significant rightward turn of the Supreme Court. But the note that Alito and Clarence Thomas put out was a note about the procedural context of this law that they left in place. We know the way they're going to vote, but I have to say we have 8 states that have passed assault weapons bans. We're the 9th state. So we believe that the Supreme Court will take into account the fact that these are established law, have been for some time.
Well, we're the first state since the Bruin decision that the Supreme Court came down with in October. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, which is a partner of ours in New York, sued under City of New York in New York, several things, several items. One, you couldn't transport a gun, so forth and so on. So Bruin, Judge Thomas particularly, wrote a new opinion of the Second Amendment, and this is the first case that's going to hit with that that new opinion in place.
So again, you heard some of the back and forth there, including State Rifle Association Executive Director Richard Pearson. These were all from months ago. After the governor signed the measure, it was enacted, the ban was in place. Gun stores had to take things off their shelves or limit who could actually purchase those things, despite any previous orders they may have made up to that point. And then you had also the lawsuits being filed. We'll get to those coming up, and including your phone calls at 217-629-7970. How do you predict this is going to go? Do you think that the federal judge is going to issue a preliminary injunction blocking the law and getting appealed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and then possibly appealed up to the U.S. Supreme Court? Or do you feel that we're going to have an amicable end to this, if there is such a thing, once these types of laws are passed? So stay tuned. We'll get to your calls at 217-629-7970 coming up here on WMA.